I'm Ben with the BTC Sessions. I'm here at the base of the Bow Tower in Calgary, Canada, and today I'm going to bring to you an interview that I had the pleasure of conducting earlier in the week, and it's with a guy by the name of Trezor. Now, he's been in Bitcoin since before it was a quarter, and he's a very well-educated guy. He's got a ton of great insight on a lot of the stuff happening in the space, so I hope you enjoyed the interview. Without further ado, here is Trezor. Hello everyone, I'm very excited for this interview here. I'm sitting down with a man that I've been following for quite some time. He's a guy by the name of Trezor. He's one of the early investors in Bitcoin and Bitcoin infrastructure. He was an early investor in things like BitPay and Kraken, Bitagio, Armory. There's a lot there. He got into Bitcoin when it was a quarter. So he's been around the block and he's got a lot of solid information to share. We're going to talk a little bit about how he got into Bitcoin, and then we're going to dive into some of the recent news regarding the the canceling of the SegWit 2x fork. So Trace, nice. I love that you have that there.
Got my prop.
That's awesome. Trace, just for the newbies that are watching the show that may not be familiar, could you give everybody a rundown of who you are and maybe a little bit of your background, like pre-Bitcoin, and what drew you to the space?
Yeah, so Trezor, Twitter's @Trezor. I host the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, www.bitcoin.kn. That's where I interview pretty much all the CEOs in the space, figure out what they're doing, give them some exposure. And I've been around Bitcoin, like you said, I've been around all the blocks pretty much. And I was pretty much the first publicly recognized figure. I had a blog that had several million views, and it was called Run to Gold. And that was the solution to the financial and monetary problem that the world is in. And Bitcoin came along, and so I was the first person publicly to kind of start talking about it and be like, hey, look, we could potentially have a solution here. And so let's see, my background a little bit before that, of course, very much an advocate of gold, sound money, monetary scientist, kind of like Copernicus or Newton or Goethe or Swedenborg, or we have a long lineage of monetary scientists, Minger, Mises, Rothbard, kind of in the Austrian school vein. And then even before that, I mean, I've always been kind of just really fascinated with money and markets, been investing in stocks and stuff since I was like a tiny teenager, and very entrepreneurial. I wanted a bicycle when I think I was like 4, and I wanted one for my birthday. So I asked my dad for a bicycle for my birthday, and he was like, how are you going to buy it? and so I actually took Otter Pops around with a little red wagon all by myself and sold them to the construction workers. And then I guess I've got a little bit of Ferengi DNA because my dad was asking me, he's like, how much are you selling them for? I was like, oh, they're a dime a piece or 2 for a quarter. And he kind of looked at me and he was like, shouldn't they be 3 for a quarter? And he said, I kind of like thought about it, like looked up, and just as sincere as day, I was like, but then I'd lose a nickel.
Oh, that's great. I love it.
So I'm really grateful to have come from parents that like taught me this element of hard work, putting in the time, putting in the effort, not just giving me everything on a platter. I think that's a real detriment to a lot of people. They never get to kind of kindle that entrepreneurial spirit that I think all of us have. But being an entrepreneur, taking risk, going out on your own, venturing into new territory, taking it, maintaining it, that's those are traits that I think a lot of people just don't have, especially among millennials. I was reading an article about how millennials just don't start their own business and they don't take risk and all this stuff. And it's like, that's going to serve you very well in this future we're going into.
Yeah, that's part of the I guess the lesson that I find with Bitcoin, it makes people really consider what they're doing with their money, because it's not a system that you can just borrow and skirt along with free money and debt. You have to be conscious of what you're doing with your time and with your savings. And I've found that coming into Bitcoin, it's made me a better saver. Just having sound money, with inflationary currency, you're more likely to spend it because it's going to be worth less over time. But it's definitely taught me some lessons since I've gotten into the space. And speaking of which, obviously, if you're a bit of a gold and silver bug, the sound money idea of Bitcoin is part of what.
I got more props.
Oh, there we go. There we go.
Like gold and silver. I mean, this is real stuff, and you in the email about the agenda, you'd said we're going to talk about these CME futures. So
yeah.
I got real stuff, not this CME paper stuff.
I got mine. Somebody gifted me an ounce of silver the other day while I was working.
Oh, you got the queen on there. Nice.
Yeah. Canadian, I guess, $5 coin. Interesting. But I was pretty excited to get that yesterday.
I mean, that raises such an interesting point. Not to get off on a tangent, but like this one, this is a silver and it's $1 under U.S. federal law, and then I got this one, and it's $50 for 1 ounce of gold. And if I told my chemistry professor that 50 ounces of this equaled 1 ounce of that, oh my gosh, I'd like totally fail chemistry, right?
Yeah.
Because that's just unintelligible. It's baffling. And yet the politicians in the United States have decreed that by federal law. I mean, imagine if they decreed something insane like trying to change the gravitational constant with federal law. But that's the problem we're in. That's the problem Bitcoin is trying to solve. We have a world reserve currency that's undefined.
Yeah,
it's a scary thought. This is the atom that you use to make everything in terms of financial structures. So no wonder we have monetary chaos in the world today, because the politicians have gone off the deep end.
Well, and a lot of, like you were saying, with millennials, every millennial has always grown up in a world where their money is not backed by anything tangible.
Well, not just not backed, not even defined.
Yeah.
Intelligibly. I mean, this is unbelievably problematic. Like if we defined a yard as a foot, which was also equal to 3 or 4 inches, like how could we build buildings in a safe and secure way? If our tool that we use to perform mental calculations of length or volume or weight were as unintelligibly defined as the unit we use to perform mental calculations of value, of course we would build stuff that is, needs bailout every couple of years.
Yeah.
Except people would be dead. And in this case, people are dead, because fiat currency, we're able to confiscation through inflation as a form of taxation without representation. It enables capital to be redirected and allocated to things that the market otherwise wouldn't allocate it to, things like war, things like, all this type of moral hazard. And so people do die. A lot of people die because our monetary system is so screwed up by this spurious currency instead of having sound, hard money, which is an unalienable human right. It's in the U.S. Constitution. There's a long history of why it's important. And yet, most millennials, they don't even understand the most basic facts or elements of this. I mean, who invented the gold standard? Most millennials, I don't know. I mean, most people, I don't know. It's Isaac Newton. Like, come on. They had bailouts. They had a bank failure in 1696. They're like, how do we fix this? They put Isaac Newton in and is master of the mint, and he develops the gold standard that lays the foundation for the peace and prosperity that was seen over the next couple hundred years. And so if we want to actually have peace, prosperity, innovation, technological growth, if we want to I mean, one thing I really don't like is all this extreme poverty in the world. You know, I regularly go on vacations like this to go build schools for places with extreme poverty or other types of service. And the chief reason for all of this extreme poverty is because of a lack of property rights. And the chief form of property rights is going to be your sound or hard money. And
Mhm.
so, you know, the reason people are poor and the reason they're starving to death and the reason they die and the reason we have so much war and the reason, I mean, all of these problems in society trace back to having gotten away from sound money and being put upon by a spurious currency.
And do you feel that now that we have a form of censorship resistant sound money, and people will have that comparison moving forward, hopefully without too much manipulation? Do you think there's going to be a re-education of, because like we were saying, an entire generation has grown up with just this worthless paper money in our pockets, and that's the norm. It's the norm that our money is able to buy less year after year. So do you see a re-education moving forward, or is it going to be a hard lesson for an entire generation of people before uh, before we move on to that?
Well, I think it's already been a hard lesson. My father, when he took his first job out of college, it paid $900 a month with the railroad. It paid 25.7 ounces of gold per month, which is about $500,000 a year in today's gold prices relative to Federal Reserve notes. And so that's very illustrative of how much the standard of living has been deprecated because the resources have been reallocated. So pretty much all the benefits of the information age and personal computers and the internet and all of this stuff have not accrued to the people. So it's been a very hard lesson, and that's why they're slaves. They're in debt. You know,
Yeah.
and borrower is lender to the saver. That's why they have student loan. That's why they have mortgages on houses. I mean, you should be able to buy a house and pay it off with 6 months of your salary when you're a brand new college graduate, if
Yeah.
not even faster, because of all the technological innovation that we've had, and the increase in productivity that's given to the economy. And so, yeah, it's been a very hard lesson, but some people just like to be slaves, I suppose. And so they'll just continue to get to be slaves because guess what? There's AI and robotics and tons of automation on the horizon. And so you're either going to get on the train or you're going to you're going to get kind of run over by it economically. And Bitcoin is definitely a tool that people can use to advance their own freedom. And what I mean by that is it's your tool for monetary sovereignty. I mean, that's why I funded Armory, which is free open source software. Like, you don't have to pay anybody for it, and you can hold the private keys to your money yourself. It's still like the Swiss Army knife of holding your coins in Bitcoin in
Mhm.
the safest, most secure way, because you use the Bitcoin core for the network consensus. You use Armory to hold the private keys. You actually even point Armory at other blockchains, so you could use it to hold your Bitcoin Cash or whatever too, if you're a little bit more technologically sophisticated and savvy. But it's wielding that type of monetary sovereignty that will enable people to take territory in their own life, meaning take additional freedom. Because, I mean, at the end of the day, I'm sorry, but freedom is increasingly becoming a luxury good. And you're
Mhm.
going to have to be able to afford it if you want to have it. And there's no more free riding off of the founding fathers of the United States. Like, sorry, they've been dead like 240 years. And every major clause in the Constitution that protects freedom has been massively chipped away. And so if you want freedom, you're going to have to claim it. You know, if you want it, come and claim it. And the way you claim it, one of the easiest ways where you can secure that protection from violence and assert your freedom in the cheapest way possible is with monetary sovereignty with something like Bitcoin. And so you take that territory on the blockchain and you just don't give it up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, you got to buy your freedom, just like if you were a slave in the 1840s or whatever, you got to buy your freedom. Like, sorry, sorry, you thought you were free, but you're not, because, like, look at the world, if you, especially if you're in debt or whatever, figure out some good financial management practices. I personally avoid debt like I'd avoid cholera or some type of nasty plague. And I mean, I'm just a debt destroyer, especially with Bitcoin, because this black hole of Bitcoin just kind of sucks in all this debt and just poof, it's gone. So, so anyways, not to hijack your
Oh
agenda or
no,
anything,
no,
but
that's I love these kind of rants because a lot of people they come into this not understanding what the value of a system like this is until they realize the fallacies of the current system that we're working with today. So it's refreshing to hear stuff like this, and I
yeah,
think
and it's the foundation that those of us who have been in Bitcoin very early, it's the foundation, the ideological foundation that we have built all of this on is censorship resistance,
mhm.
meaning that you have an immutable form of digital cash. I mean, it's the holy grail for the people who've built the internet. And we built the internet. These internet protocol guys, they built the internet in a way that it would be censorship resistant and allow and enable this free flow of ideas and information. Now you see SOPA and PIPA, and they're all, governments across the world, the Great Firewall of China, they're trying to interrupt at a technical level this censorship resistance of the internet because they really don't like the free flow of ideas. It's been a
Mhm.
real thorn in their side because, as Mises says, ideas can only be overcome by other ideas. Power and force are impotent against the power of ideas. And it's the ideas that uphold ideologically their regimes, their fiat currencies, because those are the common stocks of their nations. And so now we've got a tool that allows you to enables you to transfer value over a communications channel and secure this protection from violence at such a low cost. That's a very dangerous idea to their regime. And so yeah, they're going to try to interrupt that at a technical level, but that this is where the great fight for humanity and humanity's future is currently taking place, is like at the core of Bitcoin,
Yeah.
because this is such an important thing for our property rights and our human rights and all of this stuff. And so, yeah, I mean, it's very exciting. If people have to claim their monetary sovereignty if they want to have it. I mean, the cypherpunks, you can write code to change the world, but people have to run it, for it to actually be of efficaciousness in their individual lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see when we're discussing how important some of these core values are, why people get so passionate about there's tons of bickering in the crypto space because everybody holds their own ideals of what they want the system to be. And we've seen a lot of that lately. And I'm going to use this as a bit of a segue into some of the recent news. So we had the SegWit 2x agreement, which was a mishmash of two polar opposite ideals. Can you hold that up one more time?
Yeah, so here's the fork, the Bitcoin fork, and there's no 2x. So
That's awesome. Yeah, so we had this agreement, and I've talked about this in other videos and other shows, and talked about what these forks were, what they represented. We had SegWit implemented on the mainnet. It's now active. Anybody can take advantage of the optimizations that SegWit offers, but you can also opt out of using it if you so choose. And bundled in with this New York agreement that happened, we also had a supposed 2 megabyte hard fork that was going to happen, but there was just a ton of pushback. And it was pretty clear that there wasn't consensus on this second part of this agreement, and whether or not the agreement actually was what made SegWit activate. I definitely don't fall into that line of thinking. And so just the other day, we had some of the key players that have been advocating this 2x hard fork essentially call it off. And it was very interesting to see that six individuals could call off a fork to the entire network of Bitcoin, just to show the centralization that was behind that movement, that six people could call it off. So I was just wondering if I could get your thoughts on the events of the past couple of days and what led us to where we are now.
Yeah, so I mean, these are 6 CEOs of companies that you have to report to FinCEN. You know, they're who knows, maybe their arm was being twisted. Maybe they were acting under duress. That's why we do this out in the open with open source software and open debate, and we don't do things behind closed doors. Like I wasn't invited to the New York Agreement. In fact, I know a lot of people who weren't invited to the New York Agreement. Pretty much all the core developers, so the 400 so I mean, but I think this just shows just how limp their power is in B2X and just how impotent they are to effectuate any type of change with the Bitcoin network. Uh, they just can't do anything when it comes to the core protocol. Which, hey, you wanna have any impact on the core protocol, you got to put in your time. You got to write some code. You got to come up with some good ideas. You got to get hammered on by everybody else. It's a brutally honest meritocracy. And they just didn't want to go through the rigorous peer review that has given us this very resilient Bitcoin code. And as a result, they figured, oh, we're going to go off and do our own thing, and we're going to fraudulently misrepresent to the SPV wallets which chain is the longest, or at least do that on our services and everything. And I think they realized like they were just going to increase their own customer service support costs and and just create a real nightmare for themselves. And so they decided, we're not going to do this. We haven't gotten any significant traction, and in fact, we are destroying our own brands. For like BitGo, for example, you have the CEO of BitGo highly in favor of this 2x fork, and then you have the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, and one of the senior engineers there, both of them publicly against it.
Yeah, that's
So
Jameson Lop, right?
yeah, Jameson Lopp and Ben Davenport. Yeah, so you have the entire technical community against this, which is kind of like, oh man, when you have a new 747, guess what? The entire executive management team, all the engineers, like pretty much everybody who worked on the process is on the plane during its first flight. So
Yeah.
you got skin in the game. And so, in this case, you're going like 2x was very much going against the technical expert opinion of pretty much everybody in the space. And part of the problem, I think, one, not only is it a hard fork, which is kind of ridiculous. Why do a hard fork if you don't have to? And we have a lot of other things that we'd like to do with a hard fork if we're actually going to do one than
Yeah.
just some brain dead, brain damage idea like increasing the block size. I mean, that's really not,
It's
it's not
kicking the
very,
can down the road,
yeah,
right?
it's
And
kicking the can down the road. It's not very elegant, and it actually erodes a lot of the value proposition of Bitcoin because it makes it more expensive to run a full node, uh, especially with bandwidth. And so, because you get, it's 2 MB, but that's every 10 minutes, and you want to sync a full node, and you're in Africa or South America or some poor place that doesn't have good internet, it really raises the cost of the node
well, and
sync.
it sets a dangerous precedent too, because if that's what we do every single time, then at some point the latency is going to be so out of sync. If you don't have a good connection, are you just
Yeah,
are you
it's
then forced to trust other people who can afford it?
Yeah, exactly. The end game theory is you're going to end up in a data center with a centralized PayPal. And part of this I think is there's a butting of heads between two different positions. The way I look at it is we got 7 different network effects. Your first one is speculation, and you have to be able to secure your Bitcoins, and you have to have an exchange to trade them on in order to speculate. But once people can speculate, then merchants will accept Bitcoin because people hold it. But in my opinion, you have to have speculation first, and merchants and consumers being the third network effect, you have to have that. You have to have speculation before you can have merchants and consumers. And so it's very much a digital gold argument as opposed to oh, if we have merchants and consumers first, that's a more important network effect to nurture than the digital gold network effect. But part of the argument is, well, we can build, with layer 2 things like Lightning Network that can serve these second and third network effects and maintain the solid censorship resistant foundation of the first network effect with speculation by not increasing the block size. Because when you increase that block size, you increase the cost of running a full node. So in effect, you're raising the cost for people to acquire monetary sovereignty.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with that.
Yeah.
Anything that's going to attack my monetary sovereignty, oh my gosh, you picked a fight, because that's kind of my core purpose for being involved in this, and plus you're attacking my wallet, because I think that the digital gold use case is a more valuable network effect from a market perspective than the merchant or consumer use case. If we're just using it for day-to-day transactions with coffee, like, how many coffee users does it take to increase the price relative to one person that holds $10 million worth of Bitcoin?
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't want it to get seized. Maybe it's a Saudi prince, right?
Yeah,
and
right.
and so like so my argument is, hey, let's start with the digital gold, take that territory, and then we can, in a very safe, conservative way, take additional territory with these other network effects. But we don't need to sacrifice the first network effect to serve the later network effects.
I think,
They'll come in time.
yeah, and
Just let it happen.
yeah, and I agree with that. I think a little of this big debate that's, and again, I see it as a minority of people that are a little impatient, and they're overestimating what should happen in a couple year time frame, but they're underestimating what can happen in 5 to 10 years. And it's like we said, do we want to compromise this digital gold sound money in essence just to build a PayPal 2.0? Is that what we're looking for? Because that's what we're going to get if we go down this road.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like, I'm an investor in BitPay, and
Mm-hmm.
these transaction fees are not very helpful to their business model, but I'm also an investor to Kraken.
Yeah.
And I interviewed Jesse on my podcast kind of about all this stuff, and his take is, look, we are agnostic towards the blockchains themselves. We don't take a stance on their internal debate and growth, just like we don't take a stance on the monetary policy of the dollar, the euro, or the yen. These are two different ways that you can approach it. You can approach it being very practical, like Kraken, or you can approach it like BitPay and want to wander into a technical political debate.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why do that? I mean, why hasn't BitPay just started accepting a bunch of altcoins? Kind of like Kraken has listed a bunch of altcoins on the exchange.
Yeah.
I mean, as Jesse said, we get something like 30% of our trading volumes from Ethereum.
Yeah.
So they're like, I don't understand why, but a lot of my Bitcoin friends are Bitcoin maximalists. I'm very Ferengi. Whatever's going to make the most money the fastest is without compromising the core values, is kind of my take. And so I also think that some of this has a genesis in some of the VCs. And I think some of the VCs, they prioritize this currency use case more than they prioritize the censorship resistant digital gold use case. And they're doing a lot of their valuation metrics based on number of transactions that are done. But in
Mm-hmm.
my opinion, number of transactions, well, that's another faulty premise. I mean, how many page views did pets.com have?
Yeah.
And so I don't really care how many spam transactions are in the blockchain. You know what I care about? How much people are paying for transactions.
Yeah.
And we're up to like $800,000 a day for the 200-day moving average for transaction fees. And so that's a hard economic cost if you back out what miners are doing to spam the network, because they get to mine their own transactions so they can artificially restrict this block size space, right? But hey, that's just part of the game, a part of the system. But transaction fees, they're up to like 2 Bitcoins per block now out of the 12.5 Coinbase reward. So, I mean, I like to look at transaction fees in dollars. You know, in Bitcoin, in some cases, it's over $1 million a day. Meanwhile, another, you know, one of the other largest blockchains, Dash, it's like $500 a day for transaction fees.
Yeah.
So people are just not paying to use Dash.
Yeah. And I mean,
At the end of the day, so it's how useful is that network actually? I kind of like Dash personally, but there's an argument to be made that, you know, if we took a ratio between transaction fees and US dollars, and that helped us figure out like what a market cap of a blockchain should be, instead of using something like total number of transactions, which was in the latest Pantera investment email they sent out. I think Pantera's just using the wrong metric. And if you use the wrong metric, the logic you're going to derive from that faulty premise will be, you could have good logic but an incorrect conclusion. And so I think that a lot of these B2X arguments, they've just started from a different premise, and in my opinion, it's just the wrong premise. And so, okay, you know, if you really want to let it get out to the point where we're going to do a hard fork or whatever, okay, like,
yeah.
But Bitcoin is a train with I mean, it's doing $20 billion of notional transactions a day. The actual economic transaction, it's estimated around $800 million a day. I mean, this is like taking a gold bar, melting it down, reassaying it. Like that, Bitcoin is a massive train. Like, I don't know why anybody would want to play chicken with it, and which is what these B2Xers did. And guess what? The train's coming down the road, and they're like, "Oh, train!" So they jump out of the way because they were going to get obliterated.
Yeah. How much do you think that the futures markets had to do with this final decision of retracting the 2X fork?
Perhaps a significant amount. I mean, I was reading a post about one of the guys. He bought $85,000 worth of B2X futures, which are now worth zero. And he put in his Reddit post, he was like, you know, when he bought it on like October 28th, that maybe his maximum downside was $40,000 loss or something. And he's like, well, dude, you like miscalculated bad. Like, how do you turn $85,000 into nothing in less than a week? Oh, you buy B2X futures. And meanwhile, you know, Dr. Adam Back, he was selling those B2X futures. And so one thing that I absolutely love about all of this game theory with Bitcoin and everything is those who calculate correctly, they get profits. And those who calculate incorrectly suffer losses. And it's just wonderful. And so, you know, hey, I'm actually very annoyed at these 2X supporters, because they're going back on their agreement. They're showing a sincere lack of integrity, ironically, right? They're basically a bunch of liars. You know, how many millions of dollars of time has been wasted, like preparing for or working on this 2X fork, and then they're going to back out because they don't want to spend 150 to $250 million just to get it over 2 to 3 difficulty adjustments. Like, I'm very, very disappointed in them. I don't know if they can ever be trusted ever again. They're just, I mean, like, why trust them? And further, I was really looking forward to selling a lot of 2X.
Oh, me too.
I mean, I was going to sell a ton of it, just like I sold a ton of Bcash, and I'm really happy that I did, because, you know, I took a whole bunch more territory on the Bitcoin blockchain by selling the Bcash, and I was going to do the same thing with 2X. And so I'm just very disappointed that these guys have really big yappers, but when it comes to putting their money behind it, they don't do it. I just, you know, hey, you can have an opinion, put some money behind it. And I don't just mean put a little bit of money behind it. Put 150 to 350 million dollars behind it, getting it over that difficulty adjustment. And that's what that's what they balked at.
Yeah.
So one lesson I think we can learn from this, earlier in Bitcoin, we treated the miners, they were pretty much, everybody was a miner.
Mm-hmm.
And so forks and all of this stuff, it was a very small community. Everybody kind of knew everybody. We were very collegial, all of this stuff. What 2x has shown us is that the miners are, there's enough money now at stake that they're very Machiavellian. And so we have to just assume, as a fundamental premise, that miners are going to always act in the worst case for Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
We have to assume that they are actively hostile attackers, which I suppose is maybe Bitcoin's just grown up.
Yeah.
I mean, that actually adds an increased value proposition to Bitcoin. Because now we're not, we're going to just operate from the assumption that they're liars, Machiavellian, that they're active attackers, that they're hostile to the network, that they want to attack your monetary sovereignty, that they can't be trusted.
Yeah.
That's just how we're going to act towards them going forward as a community, which I guess is, Bitcoin's just kind of grown up, and it adds, if think about it, if Bitcoin can operate safely and securely with that as a fundamental premise or assumption, that really increases the value proposition of Bitcoin, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
I think that should be assumed of anybody using the system. If you approach everything as you're looking out on all sides to prevent any future attacks, then it just increases the resiliency of the network. And miners are always going to act in their own self-interest, whatever it makes sense. It's a business. They want their profits. Most new miners coming on, they're not in it for well, I shouldn't say most, but a good number of miners coming on, they're not in it for the ideals behind it. They're in it because it's a business and they're making money. So
I mean, maybe some of them are,
yeah,
but now we just have to assume that they are all actively hostile,
mm-hmm.
and therefore enemies
Yeah.
to monetary sovereignty. Like, sorry, you know.
Yeah, it's a safe approach, right? Like even if some aren't, it's just the safe way to do things.
Well, they've proven themselves to be that way with 2x.
Yeah.
And they jumped out of the way at the last second because they didn't want to suffer a couple $100 million of difficulty adjustment losses. And so, yikes,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I'm gonna segue just a little bit out into now that this is out of the way. Now that 2x is, and God knows, I'm sure there'll be another another thing to bicker about in the future. But what moving forward are you excited about now that core developers can get back to the technologies that they could have been working on and were working on in the lead up to this 2x fork, as they were working on solutions to protect people? What's on the table now?
Oh man, there is so much on the table because, a lot of these core devs, it's not like they stopped working on stuff just because the miners aren't pushing SegWit out. I mean, miners had this little tiny dam and the water's just piling up behind it. I put out a tweet about just yesterday about a paper by Christian Decker on micropayment transaction funding with smart contract type stuff. And then there's another paper which looks incredibly promising, which is titled Bulletproofs, and it's with Peter Woola and Greg Maxwell, a lot of these other guys. And in terms of like fungibility, really cool paper. And then of course Dr. O'Connor a couple weeks ago put out his paper on simplicity, which is a formal verification proof like programming language for Bitcoin. So there's just so much stuff to be excited about, and the dream team keeps delivering, because that's another comparison. Like Bitcoin Core, we got our dream team, and like you got one washed up like developer with Garzik on this this 2x project, like no wonder nobody was willing to stake a couple $100 million behind him. I mean, it's a huge vote of no confidence by 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 his own supporters, right? Like they're all blowing smoke up his rear end, like that. You know, we support you, but when push comes to shove and you got to put any significant money behind it, vote of no confidence in Garzik. So I mean, he's like, whoops. You know, and
Yeah.
there's $120 billion voted behind Bitcoin Core.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. So, you know, so I'm very excited about these projects. You know, the development of the protocol is moving forward. The development of stuff on top of the protocol, like Lightning Network and Thunder and some of this other stuff, is moving forward. It's a very bright future for Bitcoin.
And there's lots of there's already I think I was reading there's 3 current Lightning implementations that are essentially ready. There's 4 others being worked on by other teams, and there's Mast, there's Schnorr signatures. There's so much in the pipeline. It's unreal.
Oh yeah, I mean these Merkleized abstract syntax trees and then Schnorr signatures, like especially these bulletproofs. The bulletproofs paper talks about using like the Schnorr signature with the Schnorr signatures with the confidential transactions and some of the proofs to like drastically reduce the size of these transactions, and then opening and closing different Lightning Network type applications. I mean, this stuff is like, we're going to get huge amounts of scalability out of these much more clever solutions. But I suppose one of the problems, if you're on the 2x side, is you have to have the intellectual capacity to even comprehend some of these papers.
Yeah.
And you know, maybe they're a little lacking on the hardware and the software on that side.
Now I'm curious, given the debacle that was trying to get SegWit implemented, do you think that we're going to be moving forward with user activated soft forks from now on? Like, is that how just going to be the norm, or how do you think we're going to implement some of these things?
And I'll leave that to our technical community to give us some suggestions, but I've given them a little bit of guidance that miners are to be treated from a starting point as being actively hostile and enemies to Bitcoin. Proposals are like, let's start from that premise, like move on down the road. I don't think that means that we can't activate with miner signaling or support. I think that would be a good idea because it's safer, and you know, they could still activate something, and then if they choose not to activate it, then we come back later and activate it via user activated soft fork.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's not like we don't potentially activating some of these things. It's just, as you know, we're treating them as actively hostile enemies. But hey, they might decide to activate some of this stuff. If they don't, then we'll come back and activate it day or whatever later.
Yeah, so always have a plan A and B, and see through Z.
Kind of what I mean. We did have that with SegWit. You know, it's just we were going to wait a year for this miner signaling. You know, so maybe we'll have miner signaling much shorter period. I mean, who knows? I'll leave this to our technical development to come up with the proposals. I got vacation to be on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm just going to touch on one other thing, and then I'm maybe going to get some words of wisdom from you to any newcomers to the crypto space. But before I get into that, let's talk about the futures market that's being launched for Bitcoin, and what that could be, what that could mean for Bitcoin in the future, as far as institutional investors and so on and so forth.
Yeah, this is both, in my opinion, very positive, but also very potentially negative. One of the reasons I ran into gold was because I ran into GATA's work, the Gold Antitrust Action Committee, GATA.org, and they've been operating since like 1999, and they basically dug out all the evidence that Western central banks have been engaged in a gold price suppression scheme. Alan Greenspan has testified twice before Congress that central banks stand ready to lease gold should the price rise. This gold price suppression scheme, it's kind of odd. If you own a lot of something, which Western central banks purport to do with gold, then why run a cartel to keep its price down? Well, their control over what we use as currency is infinitely more valuable than the price of this portfolio asset. And so they're suppressing the interest rates by suppressing the price of gold. Well, in order to do that, they've had to engage in gold leases and gold swaps. The gold in their vaults is encumbered if the gold is even there, which they don't really let it be audited in a clear and transparent way. Additionally, we don't even know how much gold actually exists or how much is being produced, because it's not like there's a blockchain for gold, right?
Yeah.
And so when we're looking at the President's Working Group on Financial Markets, which was created in after the October 1987 crash, and then how this plunge protection team is used to effectuate the gold price suppression scheme, their most useful tool is probably the CME, because the CME is the largest futures market in the world, right? And so when they want to engage in these 1.2 quadrillion dollars worth of derivatives, they use the CME. and so when the former chairman of the CME says that we're going to, quote, tame Bitcoin, I'm like, oh, you think so? You think you're going to tame this thing? Okay, what does that mean, that they want to tame Bitcoin? It means that when you own gold, you fight every central bank in the world. Guess what? When you own Bitcoin, you're fighting every central bank in the world, because Bitcoin is a threat to their fiat paper franchises. And so they want to tame Bitcoin. Well, guess what a rising gold price or a rising Bitcoin price says about the competitors? That the competitors are failing, right? And so they want to tame Bitcoin by suppressing the price of it using the CME, using a cash settled, a US dollar settled instrument. Okay, meanwhile, we've got LedgerX that have come out with fully collateralized and deliverable Bitcoin options. So Wall Street now has these two different options, right? They can use LedgerX, which are currently operational, and get delivery of the Bitcoins themselves, or they can use these cash settled CME instruments. Well, if they use the cash settled instruments to suppress the price of gold, just like they've done with suppressing to suppress the price of Bitcoin, just like they've done with suppressing the price of gold and silver, then they're going to artificially keep down the price of Bitcoin. But if demand remains constant, then people take delivery of Bitcoin on the blockchain, because there's a massive Bitcoin cash market. Local Bitcoins, Bitcoin ATMs, exchanges. You got to have the Bitcoins in the blockchain with confirmations before they credit your account. None of this like margin Bitcoin and stuff like that. And then everybody demands delivery of their Bitcoin. And if you don't have the Bitcoin, then when there is a fork like B2X or Bitcoin Cash, you don't actually get all of that new asset, right? So, one of the reasons I'm kind of very skeptical of Coinbase is, unlike Kraken, Bitfinex, Cryptopia, Poloniex, Bittrex, that all supported Bcash within a week, Coinbase still hasn't supported it. It's been months, like 4 months. I mean, what are they trying to do? Accumulate enough earnings from their trading operation to buy the Bcash to then give to all their customers because they didn't have the Bitcoin in the first place when the fork happened? And it's not like they've been audited.
That's true.
I mean, it's not like we actually know whether they have any Bitcoins or not. And so, this is a very interesting thing that could happen with the CME, because if they try to suppress the price of Bitcoin, then they actually have to Bitcoin actually has to get delivered into the market. So that becomes a question. Well, how many dollars are they willing to funnel through these cash settled instruments to keep the price suppressed? And if they try to do that, well, price controls always fail to market forces. On the other hand, if Wall Street comes in and buys a ton of this Bitcoin stuff and the price starts going up, Bitcoin is both a Veblen good and a Giffen good, which means that as the price goes up, people actually demand more of it. And I've seen this time and time again since it was a quarter. You know, the higher the Bitcoin price gets, the more people want it. Everybody loves to chase the rabbit, and you love rising prices. So, you know, the gold price suppression scheme, the fiat currency money masters, they are definitely under assault by the market. And Bitcoin has now become a major force to be reckoned with. I mean, it's settling $20 billion a day of transactions. Every transaction is, as I said, it's like melting down the bar of gold and reassaying it. So you verify with 100% the quantity and the quality of every Bitcoin in every transaction. So if they try to play monkey business games paper via these CME futures, oh man, I just don't know that it could end very well for them. And additionally, the Bitcoin network's a monster now. It's using more electricity than the entire country of Macedonia. I mean, it uses more electricity than 2 million people in a year. So, I mean, this is a major network that's now off and running, and it's, you know, it's got force multipliers to keep it safe and secure and decentralized. So it would just cost huge amounts of money to try and attack it.
Yeah.
hence why 2x failed, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so, you know, I kind of look at all of this, and it's like, well, this could be a wild battle in the markets with the CME trying to suppress the price.
Yeah.
Just, you know, every time people have bought Bitcoin and held it for a few years, they've always done well. So, you know, that price goes down, you just buy more of it, buy more of it.
It'll definitely be. I think this might be the next interesting step in the evolution of Bitcoin. Having these institutions come in and try to manipulate it. That might be the next major battle, along with the inevitable government intervention at some point. But I mean, with each new challenge, Bitcoin adapts.
Well, this is the sixth network effect of financialization. You know, hey, it's going to get built out. And I mean, just think about it. The Saudi government has now confiscated $800 billion of assets from their political opponents. Imagine if their political opponents were just holding half of 1% of their assets in Bitcoin. That'd be $4 billion worth of assets. You know how hard it would be to actually acquire $4 billion worth of Bitcoin?
Yeah.
I mean, most of the Bitcoin is either lost in deep cold storage hands, it's never going to move. Very little of it is actually saleable. So, I mean, you try to acquire $4 billion worth of Bitcoin if you're, you know, a bunch of these politically compromised Saudi princes. Yikes, you know. So, anyways, it's just onward and upward, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Trace, I'm gonna wrap here, but what I'd like to ask you, and this is for any new people to crypto that are watching and they're getting their feet wet. Do you have some wise words of wisdom for anybody that's just getting started? A couple tips, tricks, just to I guess protect their wealth as they explore this strange new crypto world.
Yeah, one is develop the human capital. Nobody cares about your money more than you do, or your health for that matter. Learn how to respect the private keys. Because if you don't respect the private keys, you're probably going to lose them. I mean, I got a friend right now, he got laid off from Deloitte over a year ago. He's been on unemployment. He lost over $5 million in Mt. Gox. It'd be something like $15–20 million today at least. So, you know, respect the private keys. You don't respect the private keys. You trust third-party institutions like Coinbase or Mt. Gox or Kraken or anybody for that matter. I mean, don't trust any of them. Have a core holding of Bitcoin where you have the private keys yourself. And to do that, you know, I'd recommend stay very close to bitcoin.org. We use coins.com for new users. Use the Bitcoin Core software for your network consensus. Use Armory to manage your private keys. Use the Glacier protocol to understand where all the landmines are at. And don't trust these hardware wallets like, you know, they're custom made for Bitcoin. I just run it on general purpose computing instruments, something like a Purism laptop, PURI.SM, the privacy, cybersecurity focused laptop. Just remove as much as possible any attack vectors, and the Glacier protocol helps you understand where those are at. So that would kind of be my my recommendation on what people should do. Just be so incredibly safe and conservative in holding your Bitcoin keys, and respect those keys tremendously. Because if you don't respect them, they're gone. You're gonna compromise them somehow.
Awesome. All right. And Trace, can you one more time tell people where they can find you?
Oh, of course. On Twitter @TraceMayer, and then the Bitcoin Knowledge Podcast, www.bitcoin.kn. And I interview a lot of the CEOs, and so I give them a lot of exposure for their new products and projects and stuff they're working out. And we want to support everybody who's actually doing stuff and building stuff in this ecosystem. It's really great to see all the activity.
Awesome. All right. Well, Trace, thank you so much for coming on. I really appreciate it. I've been looking forward to talking to you and hoping that I could someday for quite some time now. And it's an honor to have you on. So thank you for your time today.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And send me another email when you want to do it again sometime. It'd be great.
Absolutely. And guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to follow Trace Mayer on Twitter. I'll have links down below, and I will see you guys next time on the BTC Sessions.
Thank you guys so much for watching. Please don't forget to hit like and subscribe, drop a tip if you're able to, and share this video. Also, if you'd like to support the show in another way, please hit my affiliate link down below to grab yourself a Ledger Nano S, a Ledger Blue, or a Trezor. I will see you guys next time on the BTC Sessions.